think we have drums in this church. It would be dangerous. Dangerous. So if you came to the men's breakfast, thank you. And I'm sorry because you're going to hear a little bit of what you heard yesterday because I had 3 lessons to prepare and I only got 2. And so this week. And so, but I think it applies to everybody. And I think it was a good lesson since it didn't come from me because God kind of threw that at me. When you ask, he gives generously. And that's what I did this week. I knew I had to speak at the men's breakfast and at church, and I said, Lord, I need some inspiration. I turned on the radio to Spirit, but generally the songs are not what inspire me that much. I mean, sometimes they do, and I really get into a good worship, but generally radio is more of just encouraging Christian songs, not necessarily worship. And so, but sometimes the words from a radio host, believe it or not, can be inspiring, or just a topic they're talking about will inspire you. And Brent on the radio was talking about speaking at a leadership conference and how he was speaking on humility. And he thought it was funny that we always have these leadership conferences. We have these classes on leadership, and we encourage leadership in our churches, and we just leadership. We want to bring up leaders in our church. We want people to be leaders. We talk about leaders a lot in the Christian world, but Jesus didn't. And that's what's interesting to me. In Matthew 4:19, Jesus speaks to Peter. And this is Jesus calling his disciples. And you may know this about God. He uses subtle ways to get your attention. Slight words. He doesn't use necessarily 2-hour lectureships on a certain topic to really get your attention. When God gets your attention, it's usually with something small. And so in Matthew 4:19, he says, "Come follow me." That's what he says to Peter. He continues with, "And I will send you out to fish for people." But the words "follow me," it literally means to follow me. But in that context, in the biblical times, when a rabbi would say "follow me," he was saying, "Receive my doctrines. Receive what I believe." Because see, there were a lot of Pharisees and a lot of Sadducees, and they would pick their followers, and they would say, "Follow me." And they had a little bit different beliefs, and usually they would pick from the best of the best. But Jesus is on a seaside, and he's looking out into the water, and he's saying, "Simon Peter," or Simon at the time, "follow me." It also means imitate me. So when Jesus looked at Peter, he says, "Imitate me. In my conduct, in every respect, be my disciple." Now, disciple, it just means learner. Be my student. But with all implications, when he said follow me, he said be me. Be just like me. I want you to imitate me to the point where people can't tell us apart. Now, Peter wasn't very good at it, just like we aren't, right? And later on, he talks about Peter becoming, "On this rock I will build my church." Now, some people think it is actually Peter, which he was building his church on. Others say it's a man like Peter, like a rock, somebody who is stern and strong in their faith. But Peter had a lot of ups and downs and a lot of failures before he became that rock, per se. So did everyone else, though, right? Abraham lied about his wife, said she was his sister. Moses had a speech impediment and killed somebody. David, a man after God's own heart, killed somebody and committed adultery. All these men in the Bible that we say, wow, these are awesome men of God, they had failures in their life. And they weren't valiant leaders. David actually was the runt of the family. He was the runt, but he lacked fear because he trusted in God. And so in doing that, he lacked the fear to fight Goliath and become the king. To follow Christ and be admitted into a partnership of his ministry is a great honor. And God calls those who are fitted for ministry. I would go a little further. This is from a commentary by Clark, but I would go a little further to say that God fits us when we allow him to into ministry. How many of us in this room are natural-born leaders? Any hands? Raise your hand if you're a natural-born leader. Like you just woke up one day and you're like, I'm a leader. Me neither. Absolutely not. In high school, I was fairly passive. I didn't have very many friends. I didn't lead a group of people. I wasn't a gang leader of any sorts. But how many of us are really good followers? Can we follow directions? Are we good students? If we're married, we probably can, right? That's a horrible joke. Horrible joke. We're really good followers. But yet, we hear all this leadership stuff in our churches, in our Christian events, in everything. We hear leader, we want you to be a great leader, great leader, great leader. But I'm a good follower. Why mess up a good thing, right? So the interesting thing, I start thinking about this, and I said, what does Jesus say about leaders? And in Matthew 15:14, I'm kind of going to paraphrase. Actually, we're going to read Luke 6:39. It's pretty much the same verse, but Luke 6:39, there's a little sarcasm in it, so I kind of like that version a little better. It just comes off a little bit more enlightened, maybe. 6:39 says, "Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a pit?" It's kind of like, come on, that's common sense, right? So when we're pushing people to be leaders, maybe they're not called to be a leader yet. Maybe God hasn't fit them into the ministry of his calling. But we push and push for leadership. Well, if we're not called in the leadership, we're the blind leading the blind, right? We're all going to fall into a pit. You ever seen somebody magnificent in what they're doing, and you're like, and they're just doing it for fun or something, you're like, man, that guy really missed his calling. You ever seen that? Or maybe kind of the exact opposite, like somebody on American Idol or something doing a tryout and they can't sing whatsoever. And you kind of say, wow, that person should not be doing that, right? But they think they're super good at it. And so it's almost like leading a karate class, but never, ever taking karate before in some aspects of that. But one who leads, if you are the blind leading the blind, it is very obvious what's going to happen with that group, with that ministry. He says that the good thing that Christ said about leadership, when looking up leadership, he says, one who leads should become one who serves. And that's Luke 22:26. One who leads should become one who serves. Wait a minute, isn't the leader the guy who's walking out in the front and leading the charge? No, it's the person washing the feet. It's the person leading by example. And so maybe as a Christianity at whole, when we're pushing leadership, maybe we should just be kind of slow down a little bit. Since none of us raised our hand, we're not natural-born leaders, and so it's really difficult for us to obtain leadership just voluntarily. And if Clark is right, and God calls those who are fitted for ministry, or even that God fits us for ministry when we allow him to, then when we are pushed into it or encouraged into leadership per se, straight leadership, we might not be ready. You ever tried to do some kind of ministry and like you just felt like you were way over your head? Or anything really. A sport. I put skis on one time. I am not a skier. I like the snowboard where my knees are connected. It's a lot safer for me. Skis are way over my head. There's nothing I can do about that. I would never try to teach somebody how to ski or what to do that with that because it's not something I come natural to. Do sheep lead? Like, I'm talking about the animal. Because God didn't he didn't compare us to the tiger. Like we're the strongest in the jungle. He didn't compare us to the lion, the king of the forest. He didn't compare us to a massive bear. He said we are sheep. And now for us masculine men, we're like, I'm not a sheep. Yeah, you are. We're sheep. And sheep, John 10:4 says, the sheep follow him because they recognize his voice. Now, I always love this verse because it means that we have to listen. If we are a sheep, we have to listen for his voice and not just go charging out on our own. And that correlates with the fact that he is fitting us for a ministry. It's not that we're just like, what kind of ministry do I want to get in today? See, I've always thought, if I ever go to Uganda, I'll never come back. If I go to mission to Africa, see it, sayonara, you won't see me again because I'm probably going to fall in love with it and I'll never be back. And so guess what? I've never gone. And maybe God hasn't fit me for that ministry, or maybe God's fit me for something else, because it's almost like he put it in my heart to know that if I go there and I see these children that are having to hide in the jungles from people that are trying to make them into warmongering soldiers, I'm going to want to stay and fight. And I'm going to want to fight that war with them. And I'm not going to want to come back. But the point is that God made us sheep. Sheep follow a shepherd. Now, I did see randomly, I saw a video on Facebook this morning of a sheep destroying the shepherd. I mean, he rammed him, made it fall on the ground. So that was a really bad sheep. Maybe that sheep thought he was destined for leadership. I don't know. But Jesus didn't say we were some kind of magnificent leader. He said we were a sheep. And that we would follow him because we recognize his voice. And to me, this is so intimate. That means you spend enough time with Jesus to know what he sounds like. It might be not the most rugged and manly concept to think of yourself as a sheep. But I think when we begin to follow Christ, when we listen to what God said, and he said it over and over again, follow me, follow me, follow me. When we truly follow him, like he was telling Peter, imitate me, be Jesus in skin. There was an old saying that that would float around the Old Testament times, written down by historians, that would say, I desire to be covered in the dust of my rabbi. Which literally meant you followed them so close that you were covered in their dust. But it also meant that you were so much like them. You wanted to just be around them all the time. The rabbi had no privacy because his students wanted to be with him 100%. You even see that in the disciples when Jesus goes off to pray and they're confused. And they're like, why can't we go with you? We want to go with you. He's like, I got to go pray alone. Like, let us go with you. We want to see what's going to happen when you're all alone. Let us spy on you, kind of thing. And I'm surprised they didn't from a distance, and maybe they did. Maybe that's how they know what happened. But Jesus says in John 10:15, I lay down my life for the sheep. So he tells us to be sheep, and then he says he lays down his life for the sheep, and he tells us to imitate him. That we should imitate him. So that when we follow Christ close enough, we imitate him, we lay down our life, we serve the sheep. We become servants so that we can become leaders. Not that we're seeking after leadership, but we're seeking after Christ and following him closer. The closer we get to following Christ, the closer we get to him, the more we look like Jesus, the more people want to follow us. That's the interesting thing, is that there are attributes of God that will soak into us and will just exude out from us. Interesting thing, and this is nothing of me because I am nothing without Christ. But moving is like the one that it's said in this culture by lots of people, one of the most stressful times in your entire life, even more stressful than divorces, which I can't imagine that. But for some reason, God protects me from stress. Maybe it's because my wife stresses out enough for the both of us. I don't know. But God protects me from stress. I don't stress out. I have no stress. We just moved our whole house, and I've been working till 9:15, 9:30 at night every evening, getting stuff cleaned up and just straightened up. We're moving from a 2,000 square foot house to a room and a shop, and so it's a little different. But there's no stress. And see, if I was crazy stressed out, all my non-Christian friends would be looking at me going, man, how big is your God? You're all stressed out. You have no hope that this is all going to come together. And maybe they wouldn't, because that would be normal. But if they see that I have no stress, they might ask me, well, how'd you do that? Like, go through life without stress. I was like, I didn't do it on my own. Jesus did it. I wrecked my truck one day. It was all my fault. And I didn't hit no other cars. It was just, I jackknifed my trailer into the bed of my truck. And I had a friend with me, and I just laughed about it. And he goes, what are you doing? Why are you laughing? And it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it, right? It's done. It's just a piece of metal. But the guy was like, dude, that would have ruined my whole month. I would be cussing and screaming. And he goes, how can you just look at that? I mean, look at your truck. And I go, I know, it's just a truck. Right? That was a witness. That was an opportunity to witness, And I told him, I said, there's one difference between you and me, and we're the same person because we grew up together, is I got Jesus. And stuff like this doesn't affect me because I know that he's in control. It's an opportunity to minister. But when you follow Christ, when you just focus on following him, stop focusing on what am I going to lead next and how do I get into leadership and who's going to follow me? And let's focus on being a sheep, following Christ, because that comes natural to all of us, to follow Jesus. But we can do it well. Guys, do you remember when you fell in love with your wife? Anybody? You remember? You fell in love with her, you couldn't get her off your mind. Maybe that's still the same. You thought about her constantly. How many of you remember when you fell in love with Jesus and the Gospels? Shouldn't we be in love with the gospel all over again? Somebody told me the other day that our culture is not in love with the gospel like it used to be. That's why he goes, I believe that's why India and China are sending missionaries to America, because our American culture is not in love with the gospel anymore. If we can remember when we fell in love with Christ, and we can say, Lord, I want that feeling again. I want that excitement for your love. I want that desire for that connection with you. I want to follow you. I want to imitate you. I want to be like you, Jesus. Something so interesting as I'm reading the Gospels last night. So the first words that Jesus says to Peter is follow me, right? Now the last words that Jesus says to Peter. Now I wonder if Jesus asks Peter 3 times do you love me? because he denied him 3 times, and it was kind of nostalgic that way. Like, you denied me 3 times, so I'm going to make you hurt a little bit. But John 21, verse 15 and on, Jesus says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Now, we don't know what these are. Maybe they was all the other disciples. He says, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Now, we can get into the theology of the wording of love and how Peter was using a different word for love, and Jesus was using the word agape, which is a selfless love. But he says, Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." And we can look at the lambs and say, well, we're sheep. Who are lambs? Are those the babies? Maybe they're the orphans. However you want to look at it. Maybe they're the baby Christians. And Peter's supposed to feed them. I don't think Jesus was a shepherd and was just saying, "Hey, feed my animals because I'm not gonna be here very much longer." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said, "Yes, Lord, I know. You know I do. Take care of my sheep." The third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Now, at this point, it even says Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time. And there was significance in things done in threes back then. But if Jesus had to ask me 3 times, I honestly believe I would think, like, wait a second. Do you know something I don't? Wait a second. Do you not believe me? Am I a liar? Is there something that's not computing in my own heart? Jesus says, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things, and you know that I love you." I mean, I think Peter's heart is breaking right now. He says, "Feed my sheep." He goes on to tell him pretty much how he's going to die. "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hand, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, "Lord, who is going to betray you?" When Peter saw him, he asked, "Lord, what about this guy?" He just told him how he's going to die, and Peter's like, "Well, what about this guy? How's he going to die?" Jesus answered, "If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me." Now, the interesting thing is that Peter tried to get Jesus sidetracked, right? Jesus said, "Follow me." Now, this might be equally as painful for Peter to hear because he thought he'd been following him for the last 3 years, right? And now here he says it again, "Imitate me." And it may be that it was so important for Peter to hear the same words that Jesus said at the very beginning. The first words that Peter heard out of Jesus' mouth was, "Follow me." And the very last words in this conversation that we know of, at least, was, "Follow me." Even after Peter kind of got him all sidetracked and asked about the other guy, Jesus ends it all and says, "Follow me, Peter." So in the last 5 or 6 verses, it sounds like Jesus is telling Peter, "I want you to be a shepherd and take care of my sheep. Take care of the new believers coming in. Take care and feed them and make sure that they are brought up in the word and be a shepherd." But yet he says, "Follow me." Don't be a leader. Follow me. Jesus is the leader of our life. Jesus is the reason we come here. Jesus is the leader. And so if this culture or this life has just challenged you or overwhelmed you in some way to say, what do I need to lead next, or who do I need to lead, and how do I lead this person to Christ? I'm pretty sure Jesus' answer is follow me. You don't have to lead to be a follower, but when you follow Jesus closely, people are drawn to you. They're drawn to the changes, the differences in your life that people that don't follow Christ, they don't have that. The things like the complete joy Jesus talks about, maybe when you're having the worst day of your life and you have a smile on your face and it's unexplainable. The lack of stress in your life when you should be stressing like crazy. You name it, the attributes of God that can heal all things and mend all relationships. People will look at you as you follow closer to God and focus on the gospel and focus on Jesus, and they will follow you because Jesus is enticing. And you become enticing. You become a leader without even trying to, just because you're following Christ closer. Just because you took what Jesus said literally and you said, God, I want to be covered in your dust. I honestly don't think God has dust anymore, being in heaven. Maybe it's cloud vapors or something. But I want to be so close to God that you can't tell us apart. Now, you're always going to be able to tell us apart, but wouldn't it be cool to be a great leader and not even know it because all you've been doing your whole life is following Jesus to the best of your ability? Falling in love with the gospel all over again because you know your Savior and you know that you need him. I think there's something really important in the fact that Jesus felt it necessary to tell Peter, follow me from the beginning all the way to the end. If you'd like to respond, now is the time.